I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who have joined us this evening at the Museum of Science. We trust you're as excited about this program as we are. Tonight's program is part of our Celebrity Science program, a Reno Family Foundation Symposia, which would not be possible without the support of the Reno Family Foundation. And I'd like to extend many thanks to Susie and Jack Reno. Mrs. Reno is here with us tonight for making this series possible. It's been a phenomenally wonderful opportunity for the public and for us, and we thank you. We would also like to heartily thank our friends at Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, who are supporting tonight's program in particular as part of the museum's ongoing Let's Talk About Food initiative. Harvard Pilgrim is one of the premier sponsors of the museum, and they have been incredibly gracious about supporting really important programs in addition to the entire museum. So we thank Harvard Pilgrim as well. Launched earlier this fall, in fact, on Columbus Day weekend, we began a new initiative called Let's Talk About Food. It's a long-term commitment that the museum has made to bring attention to the many issues surrounding our food system, from nutrition and environment to food safety and food access, from a global perspective and from the perspective of your own kitchen table. Food is an essential part of everyone's lives, all living beings. And the choices that we make have incredible impact not only on us as individuals, but on the whole planet. We believe that the objective voice of the Museum of Science is the perfect place for housing and hosting and leading discussions on this very important and universal topic. So we hope you will join us over the next few years as we delve into different areas of the food issues. Tonight, we have a very special guest to help us launch this initiative, and we are thrilled to welcome Mark Bittman to the Museum of Science. It's a great privilege for us to have him here, and he has been very gracious about extending his warmth and incredible insight on the food issues to the museum. Mark has, as many of you know, Mark has forged a reputation for addressing major food issues in a very straightforward and practical fashion. Through his best-selling books and frequent TV appearances, he regularly communicates his message of cooking simply, comfortably, and well. He has taught millions how to make small personal changes to improve their own well-being and the health of the planet. He's truly committed to the deep truth that food matters. In fact, we can think of no one whose personal mission coincides more thoroughly with the goals of Let's Talk About Food. So please join us in welcoming Mark Bittman.
Thank you, my dear.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's talk about food. Well, there's so many different places to begin. People are going to want to know what I do about eating, and what I personally do about eating, and we can deal with that in the questions and answers. People are going to want to know many other things, but we're leaving a lot of time for questions and answers. I just got an email that said, "Obama's not getting it done. You have to be more passionate than ever." So here we go, the passionate version. A little preface. This is a serious talk, but it gets It gets a little more optimistic towards the end, but don't get so depressed that you leave. But you know, the state of food is not a particularly happy one. And I'm going to start by saying that nothing is infinite, not resources, not space, not even time. And we're running out of all three. But I do think that 50 or at the most 100 years from now, we're all going to be eating what we call a plant-based diet. And most of the food that we're eating is going to be grown using what we now call organic techniques. And a great deal of it is also going to be local. Now, this sounds like a good thing, and it might well be. But it's the choices that we make now that are going to determine whether the earth looks like a garden or sort of a Soylent Green nightmare, whether there are billions of us thriving in peace, or whether we're fighting over scraps. The choices that we make are both personal and societal, or you might say political, and we need action on both. When we talk about the food movement, we're generally talking about people who value a system in which consumers and workers and land and even animals come before corporate profits. These kinds of people might be omnivores, vegetarians, vegans, whatever. But there's also movement in our individual lives. There's what you might call your personal food policy. We can move our own diets in the right direction towards a plant-based diet, day by day, month by month. I'm here to say, keep moving. Just as you might not exercise every day, you might not fully engage your personal food policy every day. But as long as you're moving in the right direction, that's what matters. We all make value judgments. You might believe that, you probably do believe that conserving energy and recycling are better than buying a Hummer and leaving your house with the lights on all day. You might value doing more exercise as opposed to less. Or you might believe that eating less industrially produced meat, less processed food, less crap, versus eating a diet as Americans have been taught to eat for the last 50 years is the way to go. In each of these cases, there's a direction. There's a spectrum. And you choose to move toward one end of it. Veganism, that is, eating no animal-based products, is one end of a spectrum. Now, I see no reason to encourage people to become vegans. I see no reason to discourage people from becoming vegans, but I am not one who says we need to eat only plants. But I do see millions of reasons for us to all move in that direction, to eat fewer animal products, to eat more plants. This is what my latest book, Food Matters Cookbook, is about, and that's the last time I mention that, maybe. Okay, so we have two movements, a personal and a political. You know, and I actually learned that the personal was political when I was living here in like 1973, so takes me back. They rely on one another. But they're both, in this case, they're both value-driven. The so-called food system which we have now is profit-driven. And here's where it's gotten us. Hundreds of billions of dollars, maybe $1 trillion, have been spent on selling us on the wrong choices. Another $1 trillion, approximately, has been spent subsidizing food that's fed to industrially produced animals or turned into junk food. Only 1/4 of us eat vegetables 3 times a day. Half of us are obese or overweight. 5% of us eat a salad as a main course at restaurants. And the number of us eating any salad at all in the course of a day has declined by 25% in the last 15 years. Maybe 10% of our calories come from unprocessed fruit and vegetables. 1 in 4 meals contains an unprocessed vegetable. And if you take the lettuce off of that hamburger, that number goes down. When I was young, life was better for many Americans. Now, much of this was unfair or illusory or both. Few people of color lived what we thought of as the American dream, and many women were in roles not unlike that of domestic servants. Much of our wealth came at the expense of others, and when you think about it, it always does, and in the long run, it was coming at the expense of our children. Yet few of us have ever known a meal without the availability of an incredible array of unrealistically inexpensive food. The bill's coming due. The fears of a global food crisis are back, and not only because the US government warned of dramatically lower supplies of staples just a couple of weeks ago. The 2008 food crisis, during which food reached its highest per capita cost since the mid-19th century, was only ameliorated by the general financial crisis, which did little more than overwhelm a huge problem with a gigantic problem. What happened? What will happen? What can we make happen? We, that is Americans, spend less money on food than any country in the world, 7% of our income. In much of Europe and much of the rest of the so-called West, it's more like 10 or 15%. But in poorer countries ranging from Egypt to India to China to the Ukraine, it's 30% and even 40%. 7% is ridiculous. Food cannot be that cheap, and it isn't. The real costs of food are staggering. The price you pay for a hamburger is the tip of the iceberg. No one knows its true cost to society. Its cost to the environment, its cost to your health. I've seen studies that peg the real cost of a hamburger at $2. I've seen others that peg it at $10. I've seen others that peg it at $200. It's somewhere in there. The point is this: it's not 99 cents. The real cost of a burger, like that of all junk food, are subsidized, hidden, and forestalled. Initially, industrially produced food is cheap because our tax dollars are funneled to big food, which in turn profits by selling us junk. But rising prices in the US are far from the first sign of too cheap food. Global warming, water and land shortages, environmental damages all preceded them, as have lifestyle diseases, which now kill, for the first time in history, more people than communicable ones. You might think about that. These are all examples of hidden and forestalled costs. We've been naive and we've been duped, which is not surprising. Not only are entire industries dependent upon encouraging us to buy everything we can, regardless of the consequences, but even our government now seems to believe that prosperity results only from having us buy as much as we possibly can, at the cost of sucking the earth dry. We, not surprisingly, excuse me, we have led the way, we have led the charge in the American way of life. America is the world's most environmentally damaging country. Our per capita emissions are 3 times as high as they are in Denmark. Now for some statistic that you all know, but I think piled on top of one another, they have some impact. We make up 4% of the world's population. We use 25% of its energy. We produce 25% of its carbon dioxide emissions, which is more than China, India, and Japan combined. Our record in food is just about as bad. Again, we still make up 4% of the population. We eat between 18 and 22% of the world's meat. Our death-defying diet features an underconsumption of unprocessed plants and an overconsumption of industrially produced livestock, processed food in general, and junk food in particular. We can no longer sustain an American-style diet, yet Harry Balzer, who's the guru of food market research in the United States, says, there's nothing you can say that will get people to eat more veggies. I think he's wrong. I hope he's wrong. As I've said, we've been subjected to a nearly $1 trillion propaganda campaign encouraging us to consume things that are bad for us. What we need are salads. What we need is rice and beans. But what we also need is help. We need help because our lifestyle and our diet is an important part of it, is strangling the planet. Our diet is killing us individually. But let's talk about global issues first. Our way of life may remain enviable to the peasant turned factory worker who sees a world of clothes dryers, of one automobile per person, of more than one television and telephone per person, of supermarkets where a pound of meat costs what the average American earns in minutes, but for which others have to work half a day. But if the American lifestyle is unsustainable now, and it is, imagine what would happen if it spreads. The Chinese don't need to eat more like us. We need to eat more like the Chinese. Let's back up for a minute and define sustainability. What's sustainability? Sustainability is the capacity to endure. Our personal sustainability, yours and mine, our own capacity to endure, has always been determined by accident, by age, by disease, by violence. Now, however, and incredibly, it's threatened not only by our lifestyles and by whatever our personal destiny is, but incredibly by the Earth's own capacity to endure. Some more numbers. Food output is growing at 10% the rate it once did. And that's largely because multinationals mine every resource on Earth: water, land, nutrients, all forms of energy, fish and other animals, as if resources were limited, as if they were still in the 50s. They're still making profits, and the rest of us are suffering. Global borders are breaking down, of course. The weather's getting more extreme, population is growing, production is slowing, resources are dwindling. Why are resources dwindling? Well, one answer is meat. For example, the average calorie of food takes a liter of water to produce, but it takes 10 times as much water to produce a calorie of meat as it does a calorie of grain, and about 15 times as much to produce a calorie of meat as it does a calorie of most fruits and vegetables. The water needed to produce more meat does not exist. Yet global meat consumption is projected to double in the next 30 years. The story with land is similar. The average earthling requires 4.4 acres of land and sea to meet his or her needs. The average American, 22.2 acres. Why? Same reason. It takes 10 times as much land to produce meat as it does to produce plants. The same is true of fertilizer. We use more than can be regenerated. The same is true of forests, of wild animals, of just about every natural resource you can name. Now, when the amount of resources we use exceeds the amount that the Earth can regenerate, the amount that's sustainable, that's called overshoot. Our current overshoot is about 40%. This means it takes the Earth around 17 months to regenerate what we consume in a year. At the current rate of growth, overshoot's going to be 100% by 2050, which means we'd need 2 planets worth of resources to meet our demands. By the way, if everybody consumed like Americans, we'd need 4 planets. By assuming unlimited supplies, by acting as if our actions have no consequences, we've become part of a chain of events that has the potential to become the Earth's 6th mass extinction. Okay, maybe extinction's too abstract to worry about. Let's go to part 2, our health. We can think about that. Our diet is something we can actually address. And we know that if we eat more plants and less of everything else, we'll probably live longer and healthier lives, and we'll certainly have a smaller ecological footprint. We don't need agriculture on Mars. We don't need nuclear fusion. We don't even need a new mass transit system to begin to eat less meat and junk. And that's a change that'll help solve problems of health and the environment and the economy and even to some extent war, or at least global conflict. We don't, after all, need animal products or white bread or Coke. No one is born craving Skittles or Whoppers. The demand for these things is driven by marketing and by industry-friendly government. It's important, I think, to recognize that if we can make the government our friend instead of their friend, we'll find it easier to make progress. Very encouraging things to say after yesterday. How things got this way is something I've spoken about before and something that's been detailed all over the place. Much of the blame lies with the industrially produced livestock and junk food that's been sold to us instead of real food. Between 1950 and 2000, the world's population doubled. Meat consumption increased fivefold. As food became more industrial, companies producing it grew far larger and gained more control over what we eat. With the help of subsidies we paid for, they increasingly raised animals as if they were widgets. And we were sold a convenience and consumption-based economy. Along the way, we witnessed the near death of cooking and the near death of real food. We ourselves aren't doing that well either, because we've been sold a diet of things that will kill us. You could not invent a worse diet than this if you tried. We process, that is, kill 10 billion animals a year, billion with a B, not including fish and seafood. If you strung all of them, chicken, cows, and pigs, if you put them all end to end, they'd go back and forth to the moon 5 times. And that's just the US. The global number is 60 billion, which is unsustainable enough, but the prediction is that it will be 120 billion in 30 or 40 years. That's why we need 4 planets. Here's the rub. Given the opportunity, it seems everybody wants to eat meat. And thanks to meat industry propaganda, many believe we need its nutrients, which we don't. Now, that argument's been shot full of holes, so I'm not even going to address it. But here's the thing. As I said at the beginning, I'm not pitching veganism. I'm pitching sane eating. I'm pitching sustainability. I'm pitching what, for want of a better term, I call less meatarianism. Most of us, though, continue to eat half a pound of meat a day, though health experts say we're better off with half a pound a week. Now, maybe that's too much to ask, but suppose we shoot for a national average of 50% less meat. But meat, of course, is not the only culprit. Since the 50s, for example, our consumption of soda has multiplied 100-fold to 600 bottles per person per year. And that doesn't include liquid candy like Gatorade or unspeakably cynical products like vitamin water, which contains 1/3 as much sugar as Coke. Soft drinks are more popular than water. We drink 1 quart per person of sugar-sweetened beverages each day. It's about 300 calories worth. Not coincidentally, in the 20 years from the mid-70s to the mid-90s, per capita consumption of high fructose corn syrup jumped from nothing to 60 pounds a year. That's equal to about 200 calories per person per day. Roughly simultaneously, and not coincidentally, the average American gained 20% in his or her weight. Now, soda is not alone. I forgot the little fat boy slide, sorry. Soda is not alone. Other non-nutritive junk foods, we like to call them UFOs, or unidentifiable food-like objects. UFOs are everywhere. We're hardwired to eat fat, sugar, and salt, and processed food is fattier, sweeter, and saltier than it's ever been. Thanks to the world's biggest marketing budget, payoffs, subsidies, and the willful ignorance of true costs, junk food is deadly cheap. Again, we need help. Whether we actually like processed food and junk food or have become addicted to it, most Americans choose convenience and quantity over quality. Many, as we know, are forced to eat badly. Those of us who care about these things, who are willing to campaign and work and even fight for a better and more just food system, must find ways not only to provide decent food for everyone, but to teach everyone how to cook it and even how to eat it. It's not enough for us to shop at farmers markets and support the growth of sustainable food. We need to agitate and legislate as well to promote carrots over Cheetos and beans and rice, even better, brown rice, over burgers and fries. We have to work to make better food available and affordable and to make it possible for everyone to eat it. The other alternative is that almost everyone in America will be overweight or obese by 2050. Maybe our diet is inexorable. But even if we could double our meat supply to account for the demands of increased population and the desire of others to eat more like us, even if everybody on Earth could eat better, the problem here is that better actually means worse. In a way, we're lucky we can't meet that demand. The obesity rate in China right now is about 5%, but it's growing. This is the Bittman bell curve of bad behavior. It's my attempt at economics, and I've been roundly trashed by several friends who are actually economists. But it's okay. On the top of the chart, we have good behavior, represented by bicycles and broccoli. Neither of them is essential, but they're good symbols. And on the bottom, we have bad behavior, represented by Hummers and steaks. This, by the way, if you want to know how fast you're getting old, try using a laser pointer and holding it steady. Man, it's just like shocking. This is my theory of what the American pattern of bad behavior has been. We have moved away from eating good things and acting sustainably and responsibly toward the nadir of civilization from this point of view. I like to think we're about here, that things are starting to get better. My hope is that other countries who are closer to their roots will see the errors of our ways and not travel quite as far down on the bell curve before moving back up. Now, how do we get out of this mess? Well, some people think we get out of this mess by eating organic food, but that's only part of the answer. We need large-scale production, but we need it to become sustainable, and organic techniques can help us do that. But you can't, however, meet our current levels of meat and junk consumption with organic food. And I might point out that organic junk food is still junk food. Local food's another answer, and we certainly want to promote, another good word for promote might be subsidize, food that's grown locally, using local resources, benefiting local producers, and benefiting local consumers. And I think that a far higher percentage of the food that we need can be grown within an easy day's drive of this country's population centers. Though, of course, it makes sense to ship some foods like coffee and olive oil. But here's my main point again. You can't raise 10 billion animals locally. How then do we get to a fair, sustainable food system? And how do we get there quickly? Because there are real dangers in dawdling. The key, as you're already sick of hearing me say, is to turn around the overproduction and overconsumption of meat and junk food. Apart from the ecological problems, there's this. At the current rate of growth, the death rate from obesity will surpass that of lung cancer 10 years from now. Which brings us, oddly enough, to tobacco. There are tens of millions fewer American smokers than there would have been without anti-smoking campaigns. If we were only that successful in cutting overconsumption of meat and junk, we'd probably save tens of millions of lives in 21st century America alone. Perhaps even more important, we'd set an example for the rest of the world to follow. But as usual in my life, I'm speaking, well, not as usual, I'm speaking in Boston, and as usual, I'm preaching to the choir. How do we reach the congregation? What makes things change? Like it or not, we will reduce our meat intake. We'll have to. But most people haven't done so. Some might. If a close relative gets fat, gets diabetes, has a heart attack, drops dead, That person's spouse will probably change their diet. That person's neighbor will not. Some people might be convinced by talk. If you reject whale meat, why would you eat other unsustainable food? You avoid saturated fat. Why not avoid antibiotics, sugar, high fructose corn syrup? You changed your light bulbs. Why not eat a freaking salad? The thing that I'm afraid of is that willing converts are going to remain in the vast minority. As I said now 3 or 4 times, we need help. Now, I personally believe government exists for a number of reasons. One of them is to achieve agreed upon goals we have trouble achieving as individuals. Individuals can't eat better, many individuals can't eat better, for a variety of reasons. We might be addicted to bad food. We're surely partly brainwashed by the biggest marketing campaign in history. Some of us can't afford better food. Many of us don't know how to prepare better food. Let's return to soda. It's simple. Weight gain is deadly. Most weight gain is driven by increased calories. Most increased calories come from fat or sugar. And soda is the #1 sugar delivery system. Decreasing our consumption of soda is efficient, smart, preventive medicine. It can also fund progress on some of the other issues I've been mentioning. Is there justification? Well, please. As cigarettes are nicotine delivery systems, soda is a sugar delivery system, legally marketed and sold without restriction to children, given to them by their parents, dispensed in schools. Yet it's a public health menace that contributes to more deaths than AIDS, the flu, murders, or car accidents. In addition to both soda and cigarettes being harmful, wasteful, and worse than useless, they command marketing budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And they're enormously profitable. Coke made nearly $7 billion in 2009. That's profits. Philip Morris, a pathetic $6 billion. We subsidize those profits. To those who want to reduce government involvement in our lives, I say, fine. Let's start by reducing the use of taxpayer money to boost corporate earnings. Now, at least cigarettes are regulated. But a tall 5-year-old can stick $1 in a Coke machine and receive a jolt of caffeine and sugar equivalent to a cup of coffee with 9 teaspoons of sugar. And if it's a 20-ounce soda, 17 teaspoons. I believe that the soda tax, along with subsidizing people, not corporations, is among the most important and achievable legislative steps we can be pushing for right now. It's the thin end of the wedge. Its momentum could become unstoppable. And since the long-term goal is hardly a Big Mac, large fries, and a bottle of water, I think we have to go further. I think we have to move to a junk food tax, a cheeseburger tax, a processed food tax. I think that doing this could raise hundreds of billions of dollars annually while discouraging the consumption of bad food and encouraging the consumption of good. I don't see anything wrong with this. I know it's not easy. I know no one has yet succeeded in passing a soda tax, let alone a junk food tax. But let's not give up yet. These are new concepts. Some people think we're going to get big food to cooperate, and we might get big food to cooperate eventually. But right now, big food is the enemy of anyone who cares about good eating. Though big food says that it understands that there's a problem and that it wants to tackle it by creating smaller portion size, by reducing fat and sugar content, by combating world hunger, it basically acts like the tobacco industry. It hires experts to back up specious claims. It maintains it isn't marketing to children when it is. It endorses bad science. It funds front groups. It lobbies like mad. It claims that new products are safer and better. But what does it really do? It tries to sell you and everybody else around the world McDonald's and Fruit Loops. It pushes self-responsibility campaigns. Here's a self-responsibility campaign. In order to drink less soda, you should drink less soda. But meanwhile, we're going to try to sell you more soda. And if you happen to drink more soda and you get sick, that's tough luck. To me, this sounds like someone holding your head underwater while telling you not to drown. Big Food also claims it's improving the nutritional quality of foods advertised to children, though their healthy food often involves sticking a chemical nutrient in junk, not photoshopped, real picture. Healthy processed food, as we know, is an oxymoron. If you have to label something healthy, it's not, real picture. We pay for Big Food's success. Half the food now eaten in the United States is either takeout or restaurant food. But that half doesn't tell the real story. Because if you go to a supermarket and you buy a frozen pizza, a bag of chips, a chocolate cake, and a can of soda, and then you take them home and you prepare them, that counts as food eaten at home. The real numbers indicate that something like 10% of all meals are cooked from scratch, and at most 20% of our calories come from unprocessed fruits and vegetables. This crap is not real food. It poisons the earth, the air, and the seas. It poisons our cultures. It poisons our health. Big Food produces poison. The problem is this, or another problem, since this is about the 73rd problem. The problem is this. Big Food can't make as much money on a carrot as it can on carrot cake. That's one of the reasons we've been trained to uncook. We spend 20 times as much money in restaurants as we used to. We've forgotten how to teach our kids how to cook. And our mantra is, I'm too busy to cook. We are busy. We're working harder to reach the same levels of comfort that our parents did. But we're also spending 40 hours a week watching television. And increasingly, and most horrifically and ironically, we're watching other people cook. I'm here to tell you that cooking is not a spectator sport. Big Food claims to stand for choice, which is supposedly, well, it is, all-American. But in an arena where most choices are destructive, we need fewer choices, not more. And for every one of us screaming, eat plants, not junk, we have hundreds of millions of dollars shouting, have it your way. This is not choice. Look at this picture. This is the illusion of choice. This system needs flipping, and we need help to flip it. We need to act. We need to treat farmers like the all-important people that they are. We need to subsidize real food, not junk food. We need to pay what food really costs. We need to reward sustainability. We need to improve education about our stewardship of the earth and our stewardship of each other. We need to change the way we eat. To do this, we need to tax Big Food and we need to tax its deadly products. As we once demonized tobacco, we now need to demonize junk food. These are huge issues, of course, and we need to tackle them together. We've already had some success in reducing the marketing of junk to kids, but other countries are ahead of us here, and we've got to eliminate it. We need to remove vending machines from schools. As of 2004, vending machines were in almost every high school in the country. And we need to allow fewer vending machines elsewhere. Or here's a novel idea. Use vending machines to dispense real food. Let's make sure that there's free water everywhere. I mean, really. Let's address the issue of labeling. It ought to at least be truthful, don't you think? Let's fix the school lunch program, which right now contributes to obesity rather than countering it. Beyond all of this, if there were a tax on soda and other junk, let's fantasize for a minute about what we could do, especially if we link this to subsidizing consumers instead of corporations. We can actually provide incentives for people to eat better and disincentives for them to eat worse. We could take care of food deserts by giving tax breaks to retailers who sell real food. We could enable the working poor to eat better by giving them tax breaks when they buy real food. We can give them breaks on their health care premiums too. We can, in general, tax UFOs and subsidize real food. Chocolate chip cookies, $2. Apples, a dime. A Coke, $4. Maybe we subsidize the sale of carrot juice. We could create jobs for cooks, a new kind of CCC, the Civilian Cooking Corps. We teach unemployed people how to cook. They then have two jobs. They go out and teach other people how to cook, or if you're truly unable to cook for yourself, you're infirm, you're ill, you're working 14 hours a day and you have kids at home, the CCC will help you cook. If you have time to cook and you don't know how, the CCC will teach you. While we're at this, we can subsidize basic cooking equipment for low-income families. We can, of course, subsidize farmers markets. We can build or revive indoor city markets. We can, and we should, encourage a direct sale by farmers, fishermen, even hunters. In short, we can subsidize traditional agriculture instead of industrial agriculture. I think about all of this, and I think that maybe, just maybe, societies that are closer to their roots than we are would be encouraged by these actions. Maybe, as I demonstrated quite convincingly, I'm sure with my bell curve, they don't travel too far down our path. Maybe we're leaders in a new worldwide movement. I feel a little like a silly idealist. But we can act like a real society, an organization for mutual benefit, or we can act like the individuals. In a way, I hope we do both. But even if we can't get a measly soda tax passed, and remember, it came close in 3 cities this year, even if we can't eliminate corporate subsidies, even if we can't even fix school lunches, even if we can't help poor people eat well, then we as individuals can at least move towards a plant-heavy diet. We can become nearly vegan. We can become nearly vegan. We can begin to eat like people of earlier generations, and we can avoid eating like real Americans. We can move from getting 10% of our calories from fresh fruits and vegetables to getting 90%. I believe, as I'm betting most of you do, that our moral responsibilities go beyond our families. We have an obligation to move from a consumer-driven society, from a profit-driven society, to one in which we assume responsibility for determining how to help other people to think sustainably, how to help them to shop and cook, how to help them to eat in a way that was once taken for granted, sanely and in tune with tradition and with the planet's resources. We need to figure out how to pay for all of this. The right wing will say that we're after a transfer of wealth from rich to poor. But in the last 20 years, we've seen the biggest transfer of wealth to the rich in the history of the world, and the financial crisis was evidence of that. If we're able to eliminate subsidies to big food and to begin to subsidize real food for the people who need it, that would be a significant step in rectifying that. The movement starts with us personally, but it's also up to us to use our privilege and our intelligence to work towards a bigger movement, one that spreads to more people, one that forces our government to ally with us to counter the work of corporations driven strictly by profits. We have to attend to work that is driven by sound, smart, sane, sustainable values. Here's how I started this talk, and here's how I'm going to end it. 50, or at the most 100 years from now, we're all going to be eating a largely plant-based diet. If we want that to happen in a peaceful, sustainable, life-giving way, we're going to have to fight in order to make the right choices now. Thank you.
be coming around with microphones if anyone has any questions.
Someone will?
Right over here.
Okay.
Could you give an example of, or several examples, please, of subsidies to big food?
There's hundreds of millions of dollars each year that goes directly in payments to people who mostly raise corn, soy, wheat, rice, and cotton. Cotton is obviously a separate issue. 50 to 60% of all corn and soy is used in animal feed. The rest is mostly used to produce things like corn oil and soy oil. So when you look at something like a chicken McNugget, you're looking at an animal that was raised on subsidized food and then processed and then combined with other subsidized food and then cooked in other subsidized food. That is, it's raised on meal that's been subsidized. It's then combined, its meat is combined with meal that's been subsidized, and it's fried in oil that's been subsidized. So you can look at ingredients like that or at foods like that, so-called foods like that, and see subsidies everywhere. The same with soda. High fructose corn syrup is made from corn, which is, after soy, the most highly subsidized crop in the United States. I think the people with the microphones are calling on you, not me.
In your current diet, are there times that you do eat meat, and what kind? And are there times that you drink carbonated beverages that have sugar, possibly not high fructose corn syrup? But do you have things in your diet that are like that?
Yeah. I remain omnivorous. I mean, I'll talk a little bit about my diet, and I'll answer your question at the same time. I've believed all this stuff for a while, but I have personal issues for eating the way I do also, which many middle-aged people do, which is that I have been through weighing 15% more than I ought to, and having cholesterol that's 20% higher than it should be, and blood sugar that's on the wrong side of 3 or 6 or whatever the magic number is, and having a few other related diseases. And I went to a doctor a few years ago who I've known for a long time and quite adore, and he said, "You should be a vegan." And I said, "That's not happening." And he said, "Well, you're a smart guy, figure something out." So I started eating as a very strict vegan from dawn until dusk. And from dawn until dusk, most days, and I'm imperfect, and I'm going to get back to the imperfection here because I think it's as important as everything else that I'm going to say. Most days I eat whole grains, fresh fruits and vegetables, legumes, nuts and seeds from morning until night. I don't even eat white bread or white rice and stuff like that. Other days I'll get back to. And then at night I eat what I want. And I found over the years that I eat what I want in generally more moderate quantities than I used to. And I also have found that there are days when I'm completely vegan. The last couple of days were like that as it happens. But I've been doing this 4 years, so it's sort of fallen into a more natural and less rule-driven pattern. So there are days when I have a hamburger and a Diet Coke. I mean, I don't really drink regular Coke for lunch, but or I might have bacon and eggs for breakfast. I mean, this is rare, but this happens. But I want to just talk about that for a second because it goes back to the very beginning of what I was saying, which is that there's a current, there's a movement. At this end of the spectrum is the slide, the couple of slides of typical American diets. At this end of the spectrum is veganism. I feel like no matter where you are on this spectrum, the desirable direction is this one. This is the desirable movement. And as I said at the beginning, I see no reason to actually reach this goal. I see no reason to not reach it, but I'm not pushing reaching this goal. We all know that the journey is more important than the path, than the goal anyway. So at this end of the spectrum is a plant-based diet. If you're moving in that direction, and whether you're moving at a rate of 1% a day or 10% a day, you're moving in the right direction. And if you're 2 steps forward and 1 step back, but you look at the macro picture of things, and you're still moving in that direction, more power to you. It's about proportion. And the whole, if Americans' diet looks like this, with meat and junk food and processed food on this end of the scale or seesaw, and unprocessed plants on this end of the seesaw, ideally you want your diet to look like that. But it's not going to do that. So if it looks like that, that's a marked improvement. And that's really all I'm after. That's what I'm pushing.
You touched on it a little bit with your point of view about accessibility and how you're preaching to the choir a lot of times with these talks that you do. And that really resonates with me as a dietitian because I've worked with individuals that don't have access. And so when I've recommended to people to eat more fruits and vegetables, focus on a plant-based diet, it's really going to be dependent on their personal situation and more so their finances. And I wondered your point of view on, I'm worried that people think I should eat a plant-based diet, so if they can, they go to Whole Foods. So they start going to the supermarkets that offer luxurious experiences to purchase organic, but then there's the flip side, especially when I was working in New Mexico, where I couldn't possibly recommend that because their options were at a 7-Eleven.
Right.
So I just wonder what
Well,
can we
there's
do?
There's two questions,
Yeah.
or there's probably more than two questions. But the economic thing, well, if you don't have a car in this country, you're in trouble. That is true. Because I can point out, I was in South Florida 2 nights ago, and I stopped at a Winn-Dixie. I want to tell you, that supermarket is a food desert, right? So, and I bought, and I bought brown rice, a bag of white beans, a delicata squash, an onion, a head of garlic, and 4 zucchini. And it cost me $8 or $10, and I proceeded to live on it for 2 days because I needed to be holed up. I was alone. I didn't want to go out. I just want to, and so I made different, and I bought a box of pasta. So I made different combinations of those things and literally lived on it for 2 days. So I don't think it's so much that people can't afford real food. And with all due respect to the Whole Foods people here, I never say go shop at Whole Foods. I would never say that. I would say go buy real food. If you can afford organic food, if you can afford local food, if you have access to it, great. But don't let that stuff keep you from buying plants and other, even unprocessed meats and whatever. Don't let that stuff, don't let my message sound like, and I've worked really hard to try to make this not sound like go buy organic food. Don't make this message sound like that. Make it sound like a delicata squash, a few zucchinis, some brown rice, some beans. That's what you want. The transportation problem is a huge issue. And that's why I think, a civilian cooking corps is obviously a fantasy, but it might be less of a fantasy than saying, okay, we're going to build good supermarkets in every neighborhood in the country within walking distance of people because, as you know, in the West, you could be 20 miles from a supermarket.
Hi. I was wondering about removing subsidies versus adding taxes. And I was curious, if you removed all the subsidies from the corn and the soy, would that be adequate to push up the price enough to make people choose a salad over a Twix bar? Or do you also need the tax? Or is it just it's easier to add a tax than to eliminate a subsidy?
I said I wasn't an economist. So, it's a great question, and I'd love to have the opportunity to grapple with the answer, but I don't know that it's knowable. Certainly, if subsidies were eliminated, meat would cost a lot more, especially beef, would cost a lot more, and therefore consumption would decline. And the hope is that there's a better quality of meat that costs even more, and more people are buying grass-fed beef or sustainably raised, not just beef, but other meat also, but buying less of it. So if we were to eat, no one's going to eat it. Very few people in the United States of any generation alive now is going to eat half a pound of meat a week. It's not going to be a majority of the population. But if we see the numbers of meat consumption declining and we see the quality going up, that's both going in the right direction.
You mentioned the soda tax was attempted in 3 cities. Could you tell us more about that?
New York, Philadelphia, and San Francisco. And the soda lobby came out like mad and lobbied against it, and the mayors were all in favor of it in all 3 cities, and the city councils in all 3 cities voted it down. It's pretty simple. But not without a fight, and given that it was really the first time on these ballots, or at least the first time it was considered, you know, I look at it, I'd like to see, it's going to pass somewhere. Gavin Newsom is going to get it passed in San Francisco, or Bloomberg's going to get it passed in New York. And I think it's going to be at that point like legalized gambling. Like other cities are going to say, hey, they made $20 million last year on that stupid soda tax. We could do that. We could use $20 million or $50 million, whatever the number is. So why don't we do that? And then that's why I say it's the thin end of the wedge. I really do think that it will snowball and that people will then say, well, soda, you know, soda's pretty bad, but what about this other stuff over here? What about things that have no natural ingredients whatsoever? What about the snack mix they gave me on the plane the other day that was in a package this big, and that package was almost not big enough to put the label on because there were so many ingredients in there? What about that?
You mentioned having Diet Coke for lunch the other just now, which disappoints me because that's what I have for lunch when I'm home alone and nobody's watching me. But
well, now we know.
When you're not having the Diet Coke, what do you have? I mean, water's an easy answer, but like water with a little lemon in it, or what are the good choices?
You could have water with a little lemon in it. I'm usually too lazy. I have water and coffee, lots of coffee. Coffee is good, healthy stuff, isn't it?
So you didn't really talk much about the dairy industry, and I'm just interested in your views on where you think that is in the grand scheme of things, and also your thoughts on things like soy milk and almond milk.
Well, I mean, those are fine alternatives for people who want them. The dairy industry question is a much bigger question, and you'll note, or you might have noted, that when I talk about this end of the spectrum, I'm talking about veganism, not vegetarianism. And that's because I largely think that vegetarianism is not a huge improvement on omnivorism. It's again about quantity. And the reasons that people become vegetarians are often, they're nice reasons, but they're not often justifiable. I'm trying to be as kind as I can here. Because if you look at the old Moosewood cookbook, which is sort of a classic vegetarian cookbook, what you're looking at is a book that says, let's not eat meat, but let's eat cheese and butter and cream instead. So I think that from a personal health perspective, I don't think that kind of vegetarianism really does anybody any good. From a kindness to animal or environmental perspective, I don't think it does any good either. And, you know, I try to avoid being graphic because I don't think it's necessary to gross people out in these discussions. But if you're willing to eat eggs, but you're not willing to eat chickens, then I have to ask you, what do you think happens to male chicks? Because what happens to male chicks is they go into paper shredders, or chick shredders, really. And if you drink milk but you won't eat meat, you have to think about what happens to male calves, which for the most part are killed also. So it's not that I think that dairy is bad. I think that dairy is closer to, that's why I say animal products. Dairy has much more in common with meat than it does with plants. So if you're looking at things as a spectrum, dairy's over here with meat, and plants are over here. And it's clear I'm not a vegan, right?
There's another question over here. Hi. First, thank you for coming this evening and chatting with us.
we're trying to open a market on the North Shore in a city that has a very diverse socioeconomic residents. And our goal is to offer sustainable, local, real food. However, we want to be inviting and welcoming to the mothers who are supported by WIC. And yet, in order to be able to do that and accept those food stamps and such, we need to sell Fruit Loops. And you had a big red X over the Fruit Loops box. We don't want to sell that. However, we feel like it's an opportunity to invite them in and educate them about more sustainable options, bulk items, et cetera. What are your recommendations and how can we approach that?
Well, I'm not going to trash you for selling Fruit Loops. I don't know what your resources are. My recommendation is you have someone sitting next to the Fruit Loops saying, "Did you ever try oatmeal with brown sugar on it?" It's a lot cheaper and it's really much better for you. Because, Fruit Loops are $6 a pound and oatmeal is 89 cents a pound. And a pound of oatmeal goes a lot farther than a pound of Fruit Loops. And a pound of oatmeal is a whole grain. And blah, 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 blah. So can you convince people, are we going to have to convince people one at a time? Maybe. I don't expect to be alive to see this revolution, so it's going to take a long time.
I feel like I have a lot of information available to me on the realm of political action I can take, and I'm all over my own personal choices. I wonder if you could share with us what you have found to be most effective in terms of cultural advocacy, right? My neighbors don't eat the way I do. What have you found to be most successful in getting them to eat more like I do?
It's a really good question because the fact is that and I was just having this conversation with someone before the talk, I was thinking about how I just spent this 48 hours alone eating, just without thinking much about it and just eating really simply. And I wasn't proving a point. I was sort of being lazy and cheap and just not caring. And yet if someone had come over, rather than say, "Look how cool it is that I'm eating delicata squash mixed with zucchini with beans and rice for dinner," I would go make something more special. I would make something that I consider more special. So then I realized I'm trapped in the same sort of social scheme of things, of course, that everyone else is. And that when people come over, you're rarely gonna say, "Well, I'm gonna make beans and rice." Because you're gonna make beans and rice with pork in it, or you're gonna make beans and rice as a side dish with a piece of fish, or like that. So, what else do I think about that? I guess what else I think about that is that as we're raising our kids and as we're showing our preference, or at least our fondness for really simple meals, really, really simple meals, like beans and rice with a side of squash or whatever, that our kids are learning that this is okay, and that other people are learning that this is okay, and that it can't do anything except grow because, of course, it is okay. And that, I grew up, as did I'm sure many people in this room, grew up eating meat every single night of the week, 7 nights a week, no exception. And usually animal products at breakfast and lunch also. Well, I dare say very few people do that in a crowd like this. Very few people do that anymore. So that's a change. How did that happen? It happened through education, it happened through social pressure, it happened through realization. It hasn't happened. I still think the disincentives are what have not happened. I really think that taxation is an important thing, not so much because we need to raise the money, although the money could be put to good use, but to make the bad stuff cost more. I think that that's the way to go. But when you talk to people about tobacco, and I spent a lot of time talking to people who are through the tobacco wars, when you talk to people about tobacco, they say, the advertising campaign was great, the government funding was great, the taxes were great, da-da-da-da. But the real thing that's made people cut back on tobacco has been social pressure. And that I think as the norms change, it becomes okay to invite your friends over and say, okay, we're having beans and rice. Maybe you put some bacon in there, just. The treat is that we're having beans and rice with 1/4 of a pound of bacon in it.
There's another question over here.
What advice do you have for parents with young children when they're trying to alter their diet? You know, children who are used to eating the standard American diet. You know, I know many parents that I know are very fearful that the kids aren't going to like certain items like, you know, brown rice and beans.
Let me ask you this.
things
How
like
did their
that.
kids get used to eating a standard American diet? They didn't
Yeah,
get
no,
used to
it's
eating
true.
it at some other parent's house. They got used to eating it there. So that means that those parents were eating a standard American diet. When the parents changed their diet, the kids changed. I mean, this is something I can speak about with a little authority because I raised 2 kids who teased me mercilessly about what I fed them when they were growing up. And because I never fed them anything other than what I was eating. And I think that that's the rule about how you get kids to eat. You get them to eat by feeding them what you're eating.
About a year ago when you were on the Today Show, I watched you make a really great vegetable stew, and talking about changing the way you eat was very intriguing to me, and so we have in our household attempted to do that. But we have a big problem when it comes to lunch. And you know, the time crunch in the morning to try to pack something to take to an office really doesn't mean that you have enough time to kind of cook something. And when you're in an office environment, it really is frowned upon to be cooking something in the microwave too. So what we end up
Especially
doing...
if you set the microwave on fire, as
Yeah.
I've done.
Yeah. So, you know, we just end up with the ham and cheese sandwich, you know, and say, well, other than like peanut butter or egg salad or bringing a salad, you know, perhaps we're just singularly unimaginative when it comes to trying to be, you know, vegetarian at lunchtime, but we just find this to be hard to get out of that meat and cheese and a couple pieces of bread.
Well, it's a common complaint, and I think there's a few strategies. But first, I would say don't beat up on yourself. That would be the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is you can plan dinner to have leftovers for lunch, and you can't do that every night. I'm not saying this is a permanent solution, but maybe once or twice a week you can do that. You can say, okay, instead of ham and cheese, I'm having ham and tomato. I mean, I'm not having cheese, I'm going to have tomato. And maybe you feel a little warm, fuzzy feeling about that. I mean, it's not going to make a huge difference. I mean, what I do, you know, when I'm in New York, which seems like never right now, but when I'm in New York and I'm at the Times, I go to the cafeteria and I go to the salad bar, and I don't like it, but I do it. But the other thing I do, I would say once a week I wind up going to a supermarket or bringing stuff from home and wind up eating for lunch 2 pieces of fruit, 2 carrots, and 2 apples, or a handful of nuts, 2 bananas, and a bag of grapes, or something like that. And it works. And then you're hungry at 4 o'clock and you eat another apple. I mean, and maybe you eat another apple. It doesn't matter. I mean, you can't hurt yourself by eating. You can't eat too many apples. You could actually eat too many carrots, but I don't think anyone has actually done that. So
I actually did that when I tried to quit smoking.
anyway, I mean, it's thinking creatively, but I also think that it's something that will develop over time. And you know what else? You don't buy ham, and you don't keep it in the house, and you don't keep white bread in the house, and then you don't use them. I mean, this place I was staying in these last 2 nights had frozen burritos in the freezer. And, you know, David Kessler, who's our former FDA commissioner, who's great on these things, says when he walks through an airport, he hears them all calling to him. You know, he hears the Burger Kings and the Cinnabons and everything calling to him. And I could hear these frozen burritos they weren't even that bad, really, but I could hear these frozen burritos, their voices coming through the freezer door. If you don't have the stuff, you don't eat it. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
I would love the name of your physician who recommended veganism to you. I think he's probably a rarity.
He is a rarity.
Not the norm. My question really is, how much does your work, if at all, intersect with the medical establishment? And do you see any changes happening in terms of their approach to nutrition and preventive care rather than tertiary care?
On a macro scale, neither. I don't interact with anybody on a big scale, and I don't see any changes happening on a big scale. On a micro scale, I met a guy in Berkeley last week who's a Kaiser Permanente guy who's basically set up farmers markets in many of their sites, who's running cooking classes this is a doctor, who's running cooking classes by himself, who's teaching interns and residents how to cook and how to shop and how to think about food, who's trying to figure out interventions with patients that take place earlier. And so everything you could want, this guy is doing it. He's one guy, but he's doing it. So other people must be doing it also.
I think we'll take our last one right up here.
Hi, I really like your idea of the civilian cooking corps.
Yeah, I do too, but so what? But
even though it's a little tongue-in-cheek, because I think Americans really don't know how to cook, and we haven't been taught by our parents, many of us, and my mother hated to cook and never did really, and in the 50s was serving white bread and white rice and all that convenience food. So I never really learned, and it's been an effort to try to cook healthfully. We really enjoy your little videos you do for the New York Times and have learned a lot from those and make many of those dishes, like the edamame salad is one of our favorites. I saw that you had a slide up there of Paula Deen, who knows what to do with a stick of butter.
Right.
But is there anybody, I mean, there's an incredible amount of cooking on television. Is any of it worth people watching? And don't you think that would be a good sort of method of reaching Americans and teaching them more about this?
Well, I do, but that's not the kind of television that sells. So what sells is Iron Chef America or Paula Deen. So you know, what can I say? They're turning those minimalist clips into a cooking show, and then there'll be a cooking show worth watching. Whether there are other ones or not, I mean, it's self-serving, but I don't know what to say. I don't watch any of that stuff, so I can't say it. If you can read, you can learn how to cook. I mean, if you can read, you can buy any cookbook that's halfway decent and learn. That's how I learned how to cook, and I'm a decent cook. So, and I, you know. Well, you're describing what I do. So this is what I'm doing, is I'm trying to get people doing that. If there are things I ought to be doing that I'm not doing, I'm happy to hear them, but people don't tell me often that there are, so. Well, yeah, but there are other people doing this work. Anyway, are we done? I think so. My throat is done.
I would like to extend a warm welcome to all of you who have joined us this evening at the Museum of Science. We trust you're as excited about this program as we are. Tonight's program is part of our Celebrity Science program, a Reno Family Foundation Symposia, which would not be possible without the support of the Reno Family Foundation. And I'd like to extend many thanks to Susie and Jack Reno. Mrs. Reno is here with us tonight for making this series possible. It's been a phenomenally wonderful opportunity for the public and for us, and we thank you. We would also like to heartily thank our friends at Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare, who are supporting tonight's program in particular as part of the museum's ongoing Let's Talk About Food initiative. Harvard Pilgrim is one of the premier sponsors of the museum, and they have been incredibly gracious about supporting really important programs in addition to the entire museum. So we thank Harvard Pilgrim as well. Launched earlier this fall, in fact, on Columbus Day.
But it's the choices that we make now that are going to determine whether the Earth looks like a garden or sort of a Soylent Green nightmare, whether there are billions of us thriving in peace, or whether we're fighting over scraps. The choices that we make are both personal and societal, or you might say political, and we need action on both. When we talk about the food movement, we're generally talking about people who value a system in which consumers and workers and land and even animals come before corporate profits. These kinds of people might be omnivores, vegetarians, vegans, whatever. But there's also movement in our individual lives. There's what you might call your personal food policy. We can move our own diets in the right direction towards a plant-based diet day by day, month by month. I'm here to say, keep moving. Just as you might not exercise every day, you might not fully engage your personal food policy every day. But as long as you're moving in the right direction, that's what matters. We all make value judgments. You might believe that, you probably do believe that conserving energy and recycling are
extending his warmth and incredible insight on the food issues to the museum. Mark has, as you know, as many of you know, Mark has forged a reputation for addressing major food issues in a very straightforward and practical fashion. Through his best-selling books and frequent TV appearances, he regularly communicates his message of cooking simply, comfortably, and well. He has taught millions how to make small personal changes to improve their own well-being and the health of the planet. He's truly committed to the deep truth that food matters. In fact, we can think of no one whose personal mission coincides more thoroughly with the goals of Let's Talk About Food. So please join us in welcoming Mark Bittman.
Thank you, my dear.
You're welcome.
Okay, let's talk about food. Well, there's so many different places to begin. People are going to want to know what I do about eating, and
Weekend, we began a new initiative called Let's Talk About Food. It's a long-term commitment that the museum has made to bring attention to the many issues surrounding our food system, from nutrition and environment to food safety and food access, from a global perspective and from the perspective of your own kitchen table. Food is an essential part of everyone's lives, all living beings. And the choices that we make have incredible impact not only on us as individuals, but on the whole planet. We believe that the objective voice of the Museum of Science is the perfect place for housing and hosting and leading discussions on this very important and universal topic. So we hope you will join us over the next few years as we delve into different areas of the food issues. Tonight, we have a very special guest to help us launch this initiative, and we are thrilled to welcome Mark Bittman to the Museum of Science. It's a great privilege for us to have him here, and he has been very gracious about
personally do about eating, and we can deal with that in the questions and answers. People are going to want to know many other things, but we're leaving a lot of time for questions and answers. I just got an email that said, Obama's not getting it done. You have to be more passionate than ever. So here we go, the passionate version. A little preface. This is a serious talk, but it gets a little more optimistic towards the end. But don't get so depressed that you leave. But you know, the state of food is not a particularly happy one. And I'm going to start by saying that nothing is infinite. Not resources, not space, not even time. And we're running out of all three. But I do think that 50 or at the most 100 years from now, we're all going to be eating what we call a plant-based diet. And most of the food that we're eating is going to be grown using what we now call organic techniques. And a great deal of it is also going to be local. Now, this sounds like a good thing, and it might well be.